The man woke up to a strange sound that did not belong to the quiet mornings he was used to. It was not the chirping of birds, not the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze, but a dull thumping beat that seemed to shake the air itself. He rubbed his eyes, thinking maybe he was dreaming. But as he sat up in bed, the sound grew louder, mixed with shouts, laughter, and the revving of engines. His heart began to pound as he rushed toward the window, pulling the curtain aside with a sharp hand. His mouth fell open at the sight before him. His land, his wide green fields that usually stretched in peace and silence, was now covered with chaos. Tents of every color popped up like mushrooms after rain. Cars and trucks were parked in crooked rows across his property. Smoke from bonfires rose into the sky, and groups of strangers danced, shouted, and blasted loud music from giant speakers. It looked less like a neighborhood and more like a carnival gone wild. The man's stomach dropped. His land was private, sacred, something he had worked for all his life, yet now it was invaded, turned into a circus without his permission. He quickly threw on his clothes, his hands shaking with anger as he stormed outside. The closer he walked, the clearer the nightmare became. Trash already littered the ground. Beer bottles glinted in the morning sun. His fences had been knocked down, tire marks dug into his soil. Children ran wild through his garden pulling flowers, while adults sat lazily on folding chairs as if this was their backyard. His chest tightened with rage. How could this happen overnight? Who had allowed it? Who had dared to bring strangers onto his property? His eyes scanned the crowd desperately until they landed on a figure he both expected and dreaded, HOA Karen. Standing tall near a cluster of tents, a smug smile on her face, a clipboard in one hand as if she was the official organizer of the chaos. She was waving to people, pointing them towards spots to set up. Her voice carried across the field. Yes, you can pitch your tents there, don't worry. This is community property now. Enjoy yourselves, everyone is welcome. The man's fists clenched, his jaw tightened. He could not believe her audacity. She had turned his land into a festival ground, invited hundreds, maybe even 1,000 strangers, and was acting as though she was the queen giving away land that was not hers. He stormed through the crowd, pushing past campers who looked at him with confusion. One man carrying a cooler muttered, "Hey, watch it, buddy." But the man didn't slow down. His eyes locked on Karen, every step heavier than the last. As he approached, he heard people thanking her. One woman laughed, saying, "This is amazing, free land, free camping, you're a saint." And Karen nodded proudly. "We in the HOA believe in community spirit. Nobody should hoard space, especially land that can be shared." Her words stabbed into the man like knives. He finally shouted, his voice sharp and full of fury, "This is my land, my private property. What are you doing here?" The crowd turned, whispers spreading instantly. People looked at him as if he was the intruder. Karen turned slowly, her smile never fading. She tilted her head. "Oh look, the owner has arrived. Don't be so dramatic. You're being selfish again. You don't need all this land for yourself. So I made a decision. The HOA voted to let families camp here. You should be grateful you can contribute to the community." The man's eyes widened in disbelief. His voice rose. "You have no right. There was no vote. There was no permission. You broke my fence. You let strangers destroy my land. This is trespassing." Karen raised her hand casually as if brushing off his words. "Oh, come now. Don't be such a spoil sport. Look at everyone. They're happy. They're free. Isn't that better than empty grass and bulls locked in a barn? You should learn to share. After all, this is about community." The man's heart raced. He could see the destruction all around. His land was being ruined, yet the people laughed, ate, and drank as though nothing was wrong. His voice shook with rage. "You think you can just take what's mine? You think because you sit on the HOA board you can rewrite the law? This is theft. This is invasion." Karen's smile grew sharper, colder. "Call it what you want. But the people are here, and they're not leaving. Maybe it's time you learned who really runs this neighborhood." The man felt the eyes of 1,000 strangers on him, some sneering, some laughing, some recording on their phones. His chest burned with humiliation but also with a fire of determination. His voice lowered into a deadly calm tone. "You think you can do this without consequences, but you've gone too far this time, Karen." She chuckled, sipping her coffee as if he was nothing. "Consequences, please. The only consequence here is that you finally share. Now stop complaining before you embarrass yourself even more." The music blasted louder behind her, drowning his words, but inside the man's mind a storm was forming. He knew this was only the beginning of a battle that would shake the entire neighborhood. Karen thought she had power. She thought she was untouchable. But she had awakened something dangerous, and as he looked toward the barn in the distance, where his bulls stomped and snorted restlessly, an idea darker than anything he had thought before began to take root. The suspense built as he clenched his fists tighter, whispering under his breath, "If they want chaos, I'll give them chaos." The man stood frozen in the middle of the chaos, his land filled with strangers laughing, eating, and dancing as if it belonged to them. His chest burned with rage. But before he could say more, Karen raised her hands high like she was the host of a grand festival. Her loud voice booming through a cheap microphone connected to speakers. "Welcome everyone. Make yourselves at home. This land belongs to the community now. No one can stop us. Not even one stubborn man who thinks he owns it." Her words cut through the air and the crowd cheered, clapping and raising their drinks as if she had given them a gift. The man's jaw tightened, his fists clenched, his voice roared back. "This is my private property. You have no right to invite anyone here. You're trespassing and you know it." But Karen only smiled wider, her eyes glittering with arrogance. She stepped down from the small stage she had set up on his field, walking slowly toward him like a queen facing a peasant. "You always complain, don't you?" she said loudly so the crowd could hear. "Always whining about your so-called land. Always acting like you're special. Well, let me tell you something. This is an HOA neighborhood, and I make the decisions here. If I say this land is community property, then that's what it is, and nobody, not even you, can change that." The crowd erupted with cheers again, some people chanting her name, others shouting insults at the man. One camper yelled, "Stop being greedy, let us enjoy." Another laughed, "You don't need all this land anyway, share it." The man's heart sank as he looked at the damage already spreading. Cars parked in rows crushing his grass, tents hammered into the soil, trash tossed carelessly, his trees snapped by careless campers tying ropes to them. His throat tightened as he shouted again. "There is no rule, no law that gives you this power. This is theft, this is destruction, and you will pay for it." Karen laughed, throwing her head back as if his anger was entertainment. "Pay for it? Oh please, no one will listen to you. Not the board, not the neighbors, not the police. You think anyone will take your side against 1,000 happy people? Against the HOA president herself? No, you'll be laughed at just like always." Her daughter, standing near the tents with her friends, shouted, "Go back inside, old man. No one cares about your bulls or your empty land." Laughter rippled through the crowd, and the man felt humiliation sting like fire on his skin. But inside him the fire of determination grew hotter. He looked around and noticed some neighbors on the edge of the crowd, people who had lived there for years. Some looked away nervously when his eyes met theirs, afraid to stand against Karen, but others looked at him with quiet sympathy, too afraid to speak but silently agreeing with him. He clenched his fists tighter, knowing he was not alone. But also knowing fear had silenced them for too long. Karen waved her arms again, addressing the crowd. "This man is selfish. He keeps land empty for bulls and useless grass while the rest of us want to enjoy life. So I did the right thing. I opened it up for all of you. Because that's what community means. No more hoarding, no more greed. We share, we celebrate, and no one is above the HOA." Her words twisted the truth like poison. The campers cheered louder. Music blasted again, drowning the man's voice. He shouted but his words disappeared under the roar of the crowd. Karen leaned closer to him, her smile turning sharp and cruel, her whisper cold enough to freeze his blood. "You can scream all you want, but no one will listen. This land is mine now, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." The man stared into her eyes, his voice low and steady. "You've gone too far this time, Karen. You think this crowd makes you strong, but it will be the same crowd that sees you fall." Karen smirked, stepping back and raising her arms to the crowd again. "Ignore him. He's just angry because he lost. Now enjoy yourselves. The party has only begun." The crowd erupted again. Laughter, shouts, music, engines revving, and children running wild. The man stood silently, his chest heavy, his eyes drifting toward his barn at the far edge of the property where his bulls were locked away, their deep snorts and stomps echoing faintly under the noise. His heart pounded with a dangerous thought. Karen had stolen his land, humiliated him in front of hundreds, but she had also given him the stage to end it in a way she could never expect. The suspense grew as he turned and walked slowly back toward his house, the crowd mocking him. shouting insults behind his back. But his mind no longer heard them. All he heard was the thunder of hooves waiting to be unleashed, and for the first time that day a small, dangerous smile flickered on his lips as he whispered to himself. She thinks she controls this land, but this land has teeth. As the sun began to set, the man stood at the edge of his porch watching his land transform further into something he could barely recognize. The chaos grew bigger with every passing hour. More cars arrived, headlights cutting through the twilight. More tents appeared like weeds spreading across the field. The once neat grass was now trampled into mud. The sound of loudspeakers shook the air, and people danced, shouted, and sang as if they owned the place. His fences were no longer standing. One corner had been completely smashed by a truck trying to squeeze into the crowded mess. Beer cans and bottles glittered across the ground. Wrappers and food scraps were tossed everywhere. His beautiful garden was flattened by strangers walking over it without care, and in the distance bonfires roared higher, smoke curling into the darkening sky. The smell of burning wood mixed with the stench of alcohol and sweat. His land was dying under the weight of their arrogance, and his heart ached. With fury, he marched down to the field, weaving through groups of strangers, shouting above the music, "This is private property, you need to leave now." But the campers only laughed at him. One man with a beer bottle in hand smirked and said, "Relax, old man. Karen said we can stay, go back to bed." Another woman shouted, "Yeah, stop being greedy, you don't need all this land." Their words stabbed him like knives. He clenched his fists and shouted louder, "You're trespassing. This is illegal." But the laughter and music drowned him out, and when he tried to push his way toward Karen's little stage in the middle, a group of drunk young men blocked his path, their eyes mocking, their voices sharp. "Don't ruin the party, go cry somewhere else." One even shoved him back slightly. The crowd around cheered as if humiliating him was entertainment. His blood boiled, but he knew fighting them would only make things worse. He stepped back slowly, his chest heaving with rage, his eyes burning as he turned and walked away. Behind him the shouts and music grew louder, almost taunting him. Karen stood on stage with her microphone, calling out, "Don't listen to him. He doesn't know how to share. This land is for the people. Tonight is for freedom." The crowd erupted with cheers again. People clapped, bottles clinked, horns honked. The chaos grew into madness. The man walked toward his barn, the heavy wooden doors creaking as he opened them. Inside, the bulls stomped restlessly, their massive bodies moving in the shadows, their nostrils flaring, their deep snorts vibrating the air. They could sense the noise outside, the invasion of their space. They pawed the ground angrily, their sharp horns glinting in the dim light. The man stood quietly, his hand resting on the door, his mind torn between fury and patience. Part of him wanted to unleash them now, to let the chaos face real chaos, but another part of him whispered that he needed to wait. The right moment would come. He turned back to look at the field, the music thundering, the fires burning higher, strangers climbing on his fences, dancing on his equipment, children screaming and running into his crops. Every corner of his land turned into a circus. His stomach tightened with rage. He saw Karen standing proudly, smiling like a queen in front of her subjects, her daughter and her friends laughing loudly as they sprayed soda on each other, and all around the strangers celebrated as if they were in some lawless carnival. The suspense built as the man whispered to himself, "They think they can break me, but they don't know this land fights back." His eyes narrowed, his fists clenched, and deep inside he knew the storm had only begun, and when it finally broke, the screams of this crowd would echo louder than their laughter. The night grew darker, but the chaos only grew louder. Music blasted across the field. The thumping bass rattled the windows of the man's house. Laughter and screams echoed into the sky. Firelight flickered as drunk campers tossed wood and trash into bonfires. Bottles shattered on the ground. Cars revved their engines. As if it were a racetrack, the man stood on his porch watching helplessly as his land was torn apart piece by piece. His eyes heavy with rage, but also with something sharper, something more dangerous. He could feel it crawling into his mind like a shadow, an idea that at first seemed reckless, maybe even insane. But the longer he stared at the destruction, the stronger it grew. In the distance his barn stood tall. Inside, the bulls stomped, their deep snorts cutting through the noise, their hooves pounding the ground impatiently, as if they too could feel the insult of strangers invading their space. The man's lips tightened into a thin line, his mind whispering over and over, "If Karen wants chaos, then let her taste real chaos." He walked slowly to the barn, every step heavy with determination. The air inside was warm, filled with the musky scent of animals and hay. The bulls lifted their massive heads when they saw him, their dark eyes glowing under the dim light, their breath heavy and hot as they pawed the ground. They were restless from the endless noise outside. Their muscles rippled as they shifted, waiting for something to happen. The man placed his hand on the rough wood of the stall, his heart racing as he stared at them. He whispered, "You've been patient, but soon it will be your time." The bulls snorted loudly as if answering him. His mind raced with the risks. He knew letting them loose could be dangerous, people could get hurt. But then his eyes turned toward the field again, seeing his land ruined, strangers treating it like a trash yard, Karen laughing with her daughter, and the risk no longer mattered. His land, his pride, his dignity were already bleeding under their feet. If they wanted to play with fire, then he would give them the flames they deserved. He walked back to his porch, his eyes scanning the chaos. He noticed Karen standing on the little stage again with her microphone, shouting to the crowd. "This is just the beginning. Tomorrow we'll build more tents, maybe even start a yearly tradition. This will be the greatest community event in history." The crowd roared with cheers, bottles raised high, horns honking. The man clenched his fists tighter, his nails digging into his palms. The dangerous idea inside him hardened into a decision. His plan was no longer a thought, it was a promise. He would wait until the right moment, until the crowd was at its peak, until Karen believed she had truly won. And then he would open the gates. The image flashed in his mind, the bulls storming out, the ground shaking with their charge, the screams of 1,000 strangers scattering like leaves in the wind, the smug smile on Karen's face shattering into fear. The idea made his heart pound, his breath quicken. He could already hear it in his head, the roar of hooves louder than the music, the panic rising above the laughter. Suspense built around him as he stared at the barn in the distance, whispering to himself, "She thinks she controls this land, but tomorrow she will learn the land answers only to me." And in that moment the man was no longer just a victim watching his property burn under the weight of strangers. He had become a storm waiting to be unleashed, and when it finally broke, the world of HOA Karen and her 1,000 campers would never be the same again. The morning sun rose slowly, but instead of peace it brought a louder madness. The man opened his door and saw the nightmare growing even worse. More cars had arrived during the night. His land looked like a packed carnival ground. Music blasted from giant speakers. People cooked on open fires. Smoke and the smell of grease filled the air. Trash piles were scattered everywhere. His garden was now nothing but mud, and broken bottles glittered like sharp teeth across the field. Children ran through his crops pulling out stalks and throwing them like toys. Tents stretched as far as his eyes could see. The once green and quiet property now looked like a battlefield before the fight even began. His fists tightened as he saw Karen standing proudly on her little stage, microphone in hand, dressed like she was running a parade, her voice sharp and smug as she shouted, "Good morning everyone. Welcome to day 2 of our community festival. Breakfast is ready near the tents. Feel free to stay as long as you want. This land is yours now." The crowd cheered, horns blared, bottles clinked. People clapped like sheep following their shepherd. The man's eyes burned with fury. He could not take it anymore. Today was the day, no more warnings, no more shouting over music. It was time to show them what this land truly belonged to. He walked slowly toward the barn, every step steady and heavy, his heart pounding not with fear but with the certainty of a man who had made his decision. Inside the barn the bulls were restless, their heavy bodies shifting, their hooves pounding against the dirt floor, their eyes dark and wild. They had been kept in too long. The noise outside had filled them with tension, and now they were ready. The man ran his hand along the wooden gate, feeling the rough wood under his palm, his breath deep and calm. He whispered, "Today you run free, today you take back what's ours." The bulls snorted loudly, their breath steaming in the morning air. He pulled the heavy latch, the gate creaked, the sound mixing with the distant roar of the crowd. The bulls stepped forward, the ground shaking with their weight. Their muscles coiled with power. The man swung the gate wide open, and the storm was unleashed. The bulls thundered out of the barn, their hooves tearing into the earth, their massive horns glinting in the sunlight. They charged straight into the field, and the world exploded into chaos. The first screams cut through the music as campers turned and saw the giant animals racing toward them. Panic spread instantly. People dropped plates of food, cups spilled. Tents collapsed as bodies scrambled. To escape, children screamed, adults shouted, 1,000 voices rising in pure terror. The bulls charged through the crowd, scattering them like dry leaves in a storm. Horns tore through tents, hooves crushed coolers, the ground shook with every step. The man stood at the edge of the barn watching. His face calm but his eyes blazing. He did not move, he did not need to. The land was fighting for him now. Karen stood frozen on her stage, her microphone slipping from her hand, her mouth wide open. As she watched her carefully built empire collapse into chaos, her daughter screamed, running into the crowd. Nearly trampled as people pushed and shoved to escape the charging animals. The proud cheers from earlier turned into shrieks of terror. People tripped over tents, fell into mud, crashed into cars, and scattered in every direction. The bulls roared as they stampeded, their snorts and bellows louder than the music, louder than the screams. The once confident campers who mocked the man last night were now scrambling for their lives, dragging their belongings, abandoning tents, leaving their trash behind. The smell of fear filled the air as people ran screaming toward the broken fences, climbing, crawling, pushing through just to escape. Karen shouted into the microphone again, her voice breaking, "Stop, stop, this is dangerous, someone stop them." But no one listened, no one followed her anymore. The crowd that cheered her name was now too busy saving themselves. Her voice was drowned by the chaos. The man took one slow step forward, his voice carrying across the panic, low and steady. "This is my land, and you were never welcome here." Karen turned toward him, her face pale, her lips trembling. For the first time her confidence cracked. She tried to shout back, but her words disappeared under the roar of hooves and the endless screams of 1,000 strangers running in every direction. The chaos spread like fire, and nothing could stop it. The release had begun, and the land itself had taken back what was stolen. The bulls thundered across the field until the last of the strangers had scrambled over fences and fled to the road. The once cheerful festival was now nothing but broken tents, scattered belongings, and the smell of fear hanging in the air. Cars peeled out of the mud, tires spinning wildly, people left behind coolers, chairs, food, even their shoes in their desperate rush to escape. The man stood tall at the edge of the chaos, his face calm while his heart still pounded like a drum. Karen stood frozen in the middle of the field, her daughter clinging to her arm, her face pale, her eyes wide. The microphone she once used to boast now lay broken in the mud. Her grand plan had collapsed in a single moment. But instead of admitting defeat she turned, her voice shrill and shaking with anger. "This is your fault. You endangered lives. You'll be arrested for this. I'll make sure you pay for what you did." Her words echoed across the ruined land, but they carried no power anymore, because the neighbors had seen everything. Cameras had recorded every moment. People who once stayed silent now stepped forward, their eyes filled with anger at her lies. Within minutes the sound of sirens filled the air. Patrol cars rolled into the street, their red and blue lights flashing against the wreckage of tents and cars. The officers stepped out, their eyes scanning the field in disbelief at the chaos. One officer spoke firmly. "What happened here? What's going on?" Karen rushed forward, pointing at the man, her voice desperate. "It's him. He let dangerous animals loose. He tried to kill us. He ruined everything. Arrest him now." But before the officer could reply, several neighbors stepped out from their porches, their voices strong for the first time in years. "That's not true," one shouted. "She invited strangers onto his land without permission," another added. "She broke his fences. She told people it was community property when it was clearly private." A third neighbor held up his phone. "We have it all on video. She's lying." The officers turned to Karen, their eyes narrowing. One asked, "Did you give these people permission to camp here?" Karen stammered. I was just trying to build community spirit. It was an event for everyone." He was being selfish. But her words sounded weak, desperate, nothing like the confidence she had shown before. The officer asked again, "Do you have proof that this land is HOA property?" The man stepped forward calmly, pulling out his papers, his voice steady. "This land is mine. Fully registered, fully legal. The HOA has no claim over it, and she knew it." The officer looked over the documents, compared them with the registry on his device, and nodded. "It checks out. This is your property." He turned toward Karen. "So you allowed trespassing on private land, brought over 1,000 people, and then tried to shift the blame when things went wrong." Karen's face twisted, her daughter screamed, "It's not fair. He doesn't deserve this land. He's just greedy." But the officers didn't flinch. The neighbors crowded closer, their voices growing stronger. "She's been abusing power for years. She fines us for nothing. She thought she was untouchable. The truth poured out like a flood, years of silence broken in one night. Karen tried to shout over them, but her voice cracked, her words drowned under the rising wave of truth. The officer finally said, "Enough, we have more than enough testimony and evidence." He turned to the man, his tone calmer. "You won't be charged, you were defending your property. But he looked at Karen. "You're coming with us. There are charges to answer." Karen gasped, her face red, her hands trembling as she shouted, "No, you can't do this to me. I'm the HOA president. I control this neighborhood. You can't arrest me." But the officer replied coldly, "The law doesn't care about your title. You broke it, and now you face the consequences." The neighbors gasped as they saw the once powerful Karen step back, shaking her head, screaming at the top of her lungs, "You'll regret this. All of you will regret this." But the officers took her by the arm, her daughter crying behind her, her arrogant smile gone, replaced by fear and rage. The neighborhood watched in silence, recording, whispering, finally free of the woman who had ruled with threats. The man stood quietly, his bulls now calm in the distance, grazing peacefully as if nothing had happened, his heart heavy but strong. He looked at Karen being led toward the police car, and for the first time in years, he felt the weight of victory pressing into his chest. A quiet reminder that justice, though slow, always comes, and now the whole neighborhood had seen the truth. HOA Karen was exposed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The flashing lights of the police cars faded slowly down the street as the patrol vehicles carried Karen away, her screams echoing behind like a broken siren. The neighborhood stood frozen for a moment. The crowd of neighbors who had gathered on porches and sidewalks now murmured quietly, their eyes shifting from the destroyed land to the man who stood tall in front of his barn. For years they had bowed their heads when Karen spoke, afraid of her threats and fake fines. But tonight they had seen her downfall with their own eyes, no lies, no rules twisted in her favor, only the truth exposed for everyone to see. The man's chest rose and fell heavily as he looked at the wreckage left behind. Broken tents lay scattered like skeletons across the field. Garbage littered the grass, fences were smashed, crops ruined, but his bulls grazed calmly again, their powerful bodies moving peacefully as if they too knew the battle had been won. The man's heart was tired but strong. He had fought not just for land but for dignity, for respect, for the right to stand against arrogance, and he had won. Slowly neighbors began to step forward. Mrs. Lee was the first, her small frame shaking but her voice clear. "We should have spoken up sooner. We were scared of her, but you stood up when no one else could. Thank you." Behind her Mr. Johnson nodded, his old voice heavy with guilt. "I let her scare me for too long. But today you showed us she wasn't untouchable. None of us will forget that." One by one more voices joined. "She fined me for nothing. She made me cry at meetings. She thought she owned us, but you proved her wrong." The man listened silently. He didn't need praise. He only wanted peace. But hearing their words gave him something stronger than revenge. It gave him the knowledge that the neighborhood had finally opened its eyes, that fear had cracked and courage was returning. The next week the HOA held an emergency meeting. The hall was filled to the doors, people buzzing with whispers. The board sat stiffly at the front, papers in their hands, Karen's empty seat glaring like a wound. When the meeting began the vote was swift and sharp. She was removed from her position permanently. Stripped of power, her name whispered. Only with anger and shame, her allies sat silent, unable to defend her. The man didn't speak much. He only presented his papers again, calm and steady, proving once more that the land was his. The board had no choice but to admit their mistake. They apologized to him publicly, their voices awkward and guilty. The neighbors applauded. Some clapped so hard their hands turned red. For the first time in years the HOA hall echoed not with Karen's threats but with the sound of freedom. Later that evening the man walked home slowly, the night air cool, the stars bright above the silent street. His boots crunched over the dirt and broken glass still scattered on his driveway. His ATV was parked safely inside the barn again. His bulls rested quietly, their massive shapes glowing faintly under the moonlight. He sat on his porch steps, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes drifting across the land, the scars of the invasion still visible. But the peace sweeter than ever. The neighbors passed by, some waving shyly, some stopping to thank him again, and for the first time he saw no fear in their eyes, only respect. Yet he also knew deep inside that Karen was not done. The image of her screaming as the police carried her away still rang in his mind, her threats promising revenge, her rage burning like fire. He knew she would try to return, try to strike back, because arrogance like hers did not die easily, but he also knew the truth. She had been exposed, her mask torn away, her lies broken, and the neighborhood had seen it with their own eyes. They would never forget. He leaned back on his porch, the quiet night finally returning, the smell of hay and earth filling the air again. He whispered to himself. She thought she could take my land. She thought she could invite 1,000 strangers. But in the end she forgot one thing. This land is mine, and it will always fight back. His words faded into the night as the crickets sang. The bulls snorted softly, and the stars shone high. The battle was over. But the war with HOA Karen was far from finished. And that suspense lingered like a shadow, promising the story was not truly over.